Um, there we go. And and you'll be able to watch it for 30 days out. And since you either bought a ticket or that you've signed up as a member, you'll automatically receive an email blast about 10 a.m. tomorrow morning. Also, please note that we're using the chat function. We're going to use that for questions. So as we're going along, we do ask that you please, no matter if it's a question that's just a simple question at the beginning, put it in the chat. We'll ask it at the end so we don't miss anybody's questions, and we let the lecturer speak the whole time. And we will have a question and answer at the end. Please note our next lecture is next week. It's on Tuesday, June 1st with Dr. Lakeisha Simons from the University of Michigan on her newest book, Crescent City Girls, The Lives of Young Black Women in Segregated New Orleans. And as always, members attend for free. And if you aren't a member, we encourage you to. I mean, you can purchase a ticket for $10, or you can become a member for as little as $40, and you get all of the lectures throughout the year. So it really is a good deal. We also have lectures in June 8th, and then starting back after the 4th of July, we'll be having more, including 6 straight weeks in a row. So on music legends that are very unknown in New Orleans. So I hope that you can either become a member or you can attend some of those events. Tonight's lecture is by Dr. Ashley Oliphant and Beth Yarborough. They are co-authors of John Lafitte Revealed, Unraveling One of America's Longest Running Mysteries, which we have signed copies. I'm going to link it right now. They were very nice to come in and sign copies at the 1850 House, and I've linked in the chat function the discounted, everyone gets the discounted rate tonight. So it's in the, how does one become a member? You become a member by going to friendsofthecabildo.org, and I'll link it in there. So I'll link in there as well, but friendsofthecabildo.org and membership. And so we have autographed copies at the 1850 House online and in the store. So if you'd like a copy of the book, please purchase it at the 1850 House. The book takes a fresh look at various myths and legends surrounding one of the Glass Gray pirates. Beginning in 1805, the book traces Lafitte through his rise to power as a privateer, a smuggler in the Gulf, his involvement in the Battle of New Orleans, his flight to Texas, and his eventual disappearance in the waters of the Caribbean. Please welcome Ashley and Beth. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
We are excited to be here. Just a little bit about us before we begin, so you'll know who we are. My name's Dr. Ashley Oliphant, and I am a very, very recently retired English professor from North Carolina. I taught at Pfeiffer University for many years, and after 20 years in the college classroom, recently retired to focus full-time on writing and researching. I'm the author of 5 books. I've written about 2 books about Ernest Hemingway, a fun novel about Jimmy Buffett, and a book about shark tooth hunting. So if any of those things interest you, look me up on Amazon. My mother, Beth Yarborough, is an artist and a writer. She runs the blog southernvoice.net. If you have any interest at all in beautiful photography, especially of Southern architecture, and learning about the stories of those structures, you definitely need to check out her website. So we are here today, however, to talk to you about our new book called John Lafitte Revealed, Unraveling One of America's Longest Running Mysteries. It was published in March by the University of Louisiana Press, and we are currently on a national book tour, a Gulf States leg of that tour to promote it. So we really are excited to be here to talk to you today. Hang on just a second. So anytime we come into a city like New Orleans that has such established history with a figure like John Lafitte, we definitely want to say at the outset of our presentation that our research, while it is brand new, we think pretty innovative and does shake up the Lafitte timeline in significant ways. We aren't touching New Orleans in any way, nor do our findings alter the Galveston years in any way. Essentially, what we are doing is looking at what happened to him once he went missing, and we'll talk about that in just a moment, but trying to figure out what happened to him from that point forward. And so we hope you're going to enjoy what we have to talk about. We sure had a good time making all of these discoveries, and we're just excited to share it. So the community of Lafitte scholars is a little bit split about what they think happened to him after the Galveston years. There's a pretty big contingent of them who believe that he did indeed fake his death. And there are multiple death theories that exist, and we'll talk about those shortly. But our ultimate conclusion is that he did fake his death, and that his final path, many scholars say, took him through St. Louis and then to Illinois. We do not ascribe to that theory. Instead, we believe, based on the archival documents that we've gathered in 7 states, that his path actually took him first to Mississippi at the precise moment that the cotton boom was really getting started, and then on to North Carolina, which is our home. And he, in fact, died in Lincolnton, North Carolina, which is where we are from, and he is buried there. So we are going to explain to you how we arrived at all of these grand conclusions.
Well, as Ashley said, the route did not come through St. Louis, Missouri and Alton, Illinois. Instead, it came up the Mississippi River, settled briefly. Well, let me retrace. It began, we believe, in Havana, Cuba. Then came across the Gulf, came up the Mississippi. He settled in the Jackson, Mississippi area very briefly, maybe for about 6 or 7 years. And we have found ample documentation of that. Then from there, the route ultimately ended up in North Carolina, in a county named Lincoln County, North Carolina. Before we go into all of those details, though, we want to remind everyone, as most of you know, Jean Lafitte was a man of many, many aliases. And we believe that the latter part of his life, which is the story that we detail, involved what was certainly not his most famous alias, but it was his longest running, and that was the name Lorenzo Ferrer. We believe that once he re-entered the United States, after having faked that death and after having hidden in Cuba, that he assumed that name and used it until the day he died in 1875. That is where our story begins. The first portion of the book deals with the known timeline of Lafitte in New Orleans and Galveston and the Gulf. Then in part 2, we pick up the Mississippi years, and part 3 deals with what ultimately happened in Lincoln County, which, as Ashley stated, that is where he was buried. So what you are getting ready to hear is the rest of the story.
So history tells us, that New Orleans to Galveston timeline is very well established. We know that he had a run of bad luck and was being run out of Galveston in the early part of the 1820s. And from that point forward, he really went on walkabout. And what we know about his movements are very sporadic. So he was, dropping into places like Cartagena, dropping into Cuba. There are all of these pings for him in all of these various places. What then began to pop up between the years sort of like 1822 and 1826 are all of these death theories, right? They are all over the place in all kinds of different ports, in all manners of death. He got in a gun battle with another ship. He died of the fever. He died of something else. An old enemy found him. It was in Haiti. No, it was in Cuba. No, it was in Mexico. So all of these death theories that exist, and one of the more famous ones is on your screen now, and it's the Gazeta de Cartagena newspaper article. This appeared in 1823, and it was reported, this was actually published 3 months after it was said to happen. All kinds of things about it are suspicious, and we outline those suspicious things in our book. But as we were beginning our research, we essentially printed out every single death theory and sort of storyboarded it, right? So we laid them all out. It was just dozens and dozens of papers, and we looked at them on my mother's very large dining room table, and she looked at me and she said, "Ashley, a man can only die one time. And I said, well, that's certainly true. So she said, all but one of these has to be false. And I looked at her and said, and what if all of them are false? And so that's really the premise that we operated under in beginning this research. We did not begin it with minds made up. We had just a sort of a wide open research field and just decided to see what it was that that we could find. And so there was a lot of heat as we were trying to figure out, okay, where might he have possibly been? A lot of heat, a lot of pings happening in Cuba. And Cuba is precisely where we got our first big break with some great information.
We were tipped off actually by a footnote in a book. We were reading the recent 2017 biography of Arsène Le Carrier Latour. And there was a footnote in that book that mentioned correspondence between Edward Livingston, who was then living in Washington, and Latour, who by that point had relocated to Cuba. Many of you are familiar with both of those names as influential historical figures in New Orleans. Livingston, of course, went on to DC to serve with Andrew Jackson in various capacities, and Latour left the United States and relocated to Cuba. So in the year 1829, which was roughly 3 to 4 years after the last known quote unquote death theory, there were 2 letters written between Latour in Havana and Livingston in Washington that referenced a code name. They spoke in code of a man named Maison Rouge, who was there with Latour in Havana and who needed Livingston's help. Many of you who are familiar with Lafitte will recognize the name and the term Maison Rouge as the famous red house that Lafitte built in Galveston when he was there for those brief few years. This got our attention. The writer of the biography was a little bit puzzled about what that meant, and the only letter that he referenced was a letter that resides currently still in a private collection in France and was therefore not available to us. But it piqued our interest because of the date and because obviously we thought that the term Maison Rouge could definitely be code, and these were 2 very old friends of Lafitte's. Therefore, we decided to look for a large collection of Livingston's papers and found such in the Princeton University Library. So we decided to go up there just on a wing and a prayer to see if by flipping through all of these various boxes, something might turn up. I don't know how many of you are familiar with research libraries or with Princeton in particular, but I believe we could have gotten into Fort Knox a little bit easier than we were able to get into Princeton, but we made it. And we're trying to be on our best behavior. And we did go in and begin just looking through every box, every scrap of paper. And lo and behold, there was a letter, a second letter written a month after the one that's in France, dated Havana 1829 from Latour to Livingston, referencing again this man named Maison Rouge, who is still here and who needs our help. We took that and realized that this was groundbreaking because of the obvious reference to Lafitte and the fact that both of these men, not only Latour, who would have been hiding him or helping him to stay underground in Cuba, but also Edward Livingston obviously was in on the code and understood and knew that Jean Lafitte may not have been quite so dead after all.
And so working from there, we had the task of trying to figure out, okay, Lafitte's not dead, which makes us happy, but we have this suspicion that the man in Lincolnton, North Carolina, named Lorenzo Ferrer, who popped up in 1839, may have been Jean Lafitte. We needed to figure out and to assure ourselves that at no point was Lorenzo Ferrer alive in one place and Jean Lafitte alive in another place, because that would have obviously taken away the hypothesis that we had. And so we had to establish that, and we really, really hoped that the timeline between when we could trace Lorenzo Ferrer back as far as possible would not have a huge gap in time from this 1829 date. Luckily, our first ping for Lorenzo Ferrer is the census that you can see on your screen. It's the 1830 Copiah County, Mississippi census. Lorenzo Ferrer, and he spelled his name alternately here, Ferrier, lots of different variations in spellings over time. He pops up in 1830. What's very interesting about it is that there was no Lorenzo Ferrer with any of the alternate spellings in America at that time. He wasn't born here. He wasn't in a Freemason lodge. He didn't go to a church here. One day, poof, here he is in Mississippi as a grown man. We also checked all of the port records of the day, a very intensive research process. We could find nobody with that name who came in legally through any port. And so there we had him in Mississippi. This drew very large questions from us because we wanted to know, why would he go to that place in America at that specific time? The answer is the Mississippi cotton boom, which in 1830 was really, really getting cranked up. And we associated several character clues. It's one of the things that really helped us to unravel this mystery. Several character clues, things that we knew from the Lafitte research that then translated very, very clearly and tracked very closely with similar behaviors that we saw from Lorenzo Ferrer. And so one of those characteristics was both men had a nose for where the opportunity to make money could possibly emerge. And they found it and they capitalized. And so that is the reason why we believe he chose Mississippi.
Now, there was then a secondary problem which presented itself, which was, well, okay, we have found Lorenzo Ferrer in Mississippi, and yes, he has materialized at age 50-ish out of thin air, but how do we know that this is the same Lorenzo Ferrer who ultimately ended up in North Carolina 6 or 8 years later? Well, that answer came in the name of a woman, and her name was Louisa. She was a beautiful octoroon girl who was an enslaved person who belonged to Lorenzo Ferrer, and she was also his mistress. We found her in Mississippi on an 1831 document that outlined the fact, and you're looking at that on your screen, very detailed contract between Ferrer and a man named Brewer, whereby Ferrer loaned Louisa for a year to Mr. Brewer. In this document, Louisa is listed as being about 17 years of age. Now, the Lorenzo Ferrer who arrived in North Carolina about 7 years later, roughly sometime between 1838 and 1839, had a beautiful octoroon mistress with him, and her name was Louisa. We actually dedicated our book to her because the discovery of this document, and we actually found it at the Stephen Austin Research Library in Nacogdoches, Texas. This proves that the 17-year-old Louisa who was listed in this document directly corresponded with the 40-something-year-old Louisa who later died with Lorenzo Ferrer by her side in North Carolina. And we dedicated this book to her because we felt that she had no voice during her lifetime, but across 200 years and from her grave, she raised a beautiful hand and pointed him out to us and said, yes, girls, this is the same man. You have him. Therefore, we had our man in Mississippi, and it was time for him to move on. He actually got married to another 17-year-old girl, and we have records of that. We found those documents. The only problem with that is that 2 years later, she shows up married to someone else and ended up bearing that man 11 children, and they lived happily ever after. But there was a small problem. There is no record of divorce from Lorenzo Ferrer, and there is no annulment, and there's no record that Lorenzo Ferrer died. And obviously he didn't die because he landed in North Carolina with his mistress. Therefore, we find him having to leave we suspect, and this is a guess, and anytime we can't truly document, we're not going to tell you that we can, but it is our best guess that Nancy, who that was his wife's name, that her family, who were very prominent residents there, discovered who this man was and said to him, you know, it's time for you to leave. Either that or he feared imminent discovery and just picked up Louisa and abandoned Nancy, one of the two. But whatever the case, he went 3 counties north into Madison County, Mississippi, which is just north of Jackson. And I will let you pick up the tale from there.
I will. And my PowerPoint for some reason has stopped advancing. So you may have to look at the Nancy document for a little while until I can figure this out. But we can continue with the story.
Absolutely.
So once he left the Hinds County, Copiah County area of Mississippi, he moved north just a little bit to Madison County, Mississippi. While he was there, he lived very much under the radar, like he had been in the other parts of Mississippi. So he wasn't joining churches and being in the newspaper or any of those things. He needed to lay low, and that is precisely what he did. What he did do in Madison County, however, was resume the same thing that he had been doing in the other counties, and that was land speculation, buying land and selling it very quickly. And unfortunately, buying and selling enslaved people. There is a record of that. And so he's in the Canton area. And while he's there, he meets some very, very important friends. At that time in Madison County, there were 3 brothers living there with the last name Henderson. We know that Lorenzo Ferrer was in the same land offices as these 3 brothers, because there's documentation to prove that. And one of those brothers was very significant. His name was James Pinckney Henderson. He went on to become the first governor of Texas. He also was well known in the Canton area while he was there to be a very public figure who was known for making rousing speeches on the court square, arguing for Texas independence. And so it would be literally impossible for someone to live in his community and not know him. So we are 100% confident that the Hendersons and Lorenzo Ferrer made acquaintance in Mississippi. The Henderson name is significant because they were from a very large family of 10 brothers and a few girls. They had a hometown that was not in Mississippi. It was in North Carolina. Our hometown, Lincolnton, North Carolina. They came from, we're advancing again.
Yes, we are.
Yay. So what you're looking at here is the marriage license to Nancy. That's one of the ones that we had to skip. And this was from 1834. As I recall, Beth, we had to dig through a spider-infested library.
Yeah, and 100 years worth of dust.
In Raymond, Mississippi, to locate this document, but we found it.
We did it.
This is the lovely courthouse in Canton.
Not the dusty one, though.
Not the dusty one. This is actually not open to the public, I think, at this time. But this home is Woodside Plantation. It is in Lincolnton, North Carolina. This was the home where the Henderson brothers came from. So we know that Lorenzo Ferrer made their acquaintance, and that happened all in Mississippi.
And then, just as the cotton boom was getting ready to go bust, and we will throw in another character clue here, both Jean Lafitte and Lorenzo Ferrer displayed a very strong talent for being able to spot trouble before it found them. And we know that Ferrer probably knew the cotton boom was getting ready to be over with. And so with Louisa and whatever fortune he had managed to recoup during the years in Mississippi, most of those deals probably done in back alleys and under the table, but whatever money he had, he arrived in North Carolina, Lincolnton, North Carolina, and certainly did not pick that town by throwing a dart at a map. That was the home base of the Henderson family, and there were many more Henderson brothers still living there. So when he arrived here, years older now and much further removed from any ports where there were people who could have recognized him as Lafitte, we see that the man comes back alive in terms of his behavior. Here he was in Mississippi, deliberately under the radar. He was, as Ashley said, not in any churches, not joining any Masonic lodges, just getting by day to day and deliberately being a moving target, literally. When he gets to North Carolina, however, and now surrounded with a new posse of influential and protective friends named Henderson, he comes alive again. He helps to found a Masonic lodge in the year 1852. He's buying property. Oh, and by the way, he arrived here with money. He never worked a single day for the rest of his life, which was 35 years in Lincolnton, and he died a rich man. So while he was here, just, I guess, resting on his gold coins or whatever it was he brought with him, he was very active and very visible. He would give toasts at public events. He became politically active. He joined a church. He was frequently part of group loans made to other members of the community and was very actively making other influential friends beyond the Hendersons. So this is the pattern that continued. Physically, the physical description of Lorenzo Ferrer in North Carolina by eyewitnesses exactly matched physical descriptions of Jean Lafitte from those who knew him during his years in the Gulf. Finally, in the year 1875, at the age of 96 years old, Lorenzo Ferrer died of old age and left a very detailed will, left a great deal of money to a good number of people, and is buried in a very distinctive grave, one that whose marker he designed for himself. These are some local records. This is a lodge petition that shows him as a founding member of Lincoln Lodge 137. He came into this lodge as an existing Mason, which is very significant because we looked high and low. Mississippi was very cooperative with us. All the Mississippi lodges could not find him anywhere. Louisiana has been a little less cooperative in wanting to let us in and giving us information, but that's fine. We will continue on and keep knocking, and one of these days, one of those doors will open. However, he ended his life in the year 1875, died of old age, and the first marker that you see beyond that tabletop monument is that of Louisa. He wanted her to be buried beside him, and she was. And with that, I will let you pick up the very surprising end of this story, one that we did not expect.
No, we did not. So we knew we had to connect Lorenzo Ferrer to Jean Lafitte in a really meaningful, really convincing way. And we were really happy with the research that we had done. In fact, the book was ready. The University of Louisiana Press was ready for the manuscript, and we were ready to go. But we're still digging around for information. The picture that you see on your screen is Pleasant Retreat Academy in Lincolnton. This building is significant, and it still stands today. It is significant because this is the first place that the Freemasons in Lincolnton met. They formed their lodge in 1852. Their lodge number is 137. And I'm not sure how much you know about the Freemasons, but they are usually not inclined to let two wild women from the street into their archives to look at their books. So we knocked and we knocked and we knocked, and it eventually came to a vote, and it had to be a unanimous vote. They somehow, I still don't know how we did it. They let us in to the lodge and opened their ledger books and said, come on in and look at what we have. And so it was a really rare and incredible opportunity. There is so very much that we learned about Lincolnton and all of the families that were there during this time that we had absolutely no idea. In fact, 2 chapters in the book are dedicated to all of the things that we learned.
And not only that, but Lorenzo Ferrer's part in all of that.
Absolutely. So being able to gather that information was invaluable. Once we had finished, it had been a couple of weeks after we had finished the research, we got a call from one of the brothers who'd been helping us out. And he said, we think you need to come up here. And usually when we get calls like that, we know something's up. So we went, and 3 of the brothers had this sword out on the table. with this iron scabbard. And so we said, what you got there, fellas? And they said, this is our Tyler sword. And we thought maybe in light of what you've been researching that you should take a look at it. We used the marks on the sword to determine that it was a War of 1812 cavalry saber. It was produced sometime between 1812 and 1813 by Nathan Starr, who was the premier American sword maker of the day. He had been contracted by the American government to make a run of 5,000 swords for the War of 1812, including and up to the Battle of New Orleans. We were thrilled to find a period sword with in the lodge where we know Lorenzo Ferrer / Jean Lafitte was a member. And so if you're not familiar with the Freemasons, a Tyler, and what this is a Tyler sword. A Tyler is an officer position, and the Tyler, whenever they are holding important ceremonies, will stand at the door with a sword to sort of ceremonially protect whatever it is that they are doing. And so this is the Tyler sword. It has been hanging on 2 rusty nails in the Lincoln Lodge for as long as the members there, the oldest members there, can remember. And so we were super happy to find a period sword in the lodge, and went home, very satisfied. I could not sleep that night. And my wheels were just spinning with all of the what ifs. And I knew that we had not really looked closely at that iron scabbard. It was kind of dark in there, and we didn't want to overstay our welcome because we're just thankful that they let us in the first place. I could not get it out of my head and did not get a wink of sleep that night. So in the morning, I asked my husband if he had a black light, which quickly prompted him to be concerned that I had broken the law in some way and was looking for blood splatter to hide it. And so I assured him that I had not committed a crime, that I needed it to look at the scabbard of the sword. So fortunately, the members let us back in, and we got to look very closely at the sheath and the sword with the black light. We were all leaned over the sword and looking at it from every vantage point that we can think of. And then all at the same time, we said, stop there. And Lyndon Berry, who was the brother who was closest down with the black light, said, all right, I see it. And we said, Lyndon, what do you see? And Lyndon didn't know what he was supposed to be looking for. He said, I see a capital J. I see a lowercase n. I see a space. Then I see a capital L. And at that point, we fainted. We were absolutely flabbergasted, and we knew exactly what was going to come next. The scabbard has the hand-etched signature of Jean Lafitte on it, and they had absolutely, number one, they'd not even paid attention to the sword that they had, much less did they know that this inscription was there. Now we made, and you can see the penciled in writing below the scabbard there demonstrates exactly what it is that you can see. We knew that we would not be able to reveal findings like this without having them verified by experts. And so the first thing we did was take the sword and have the marks analyzed to make sure that we were correct in our appraisal of its maker and its age. And we were. We then consulted with experts at Colonial Williamsburg, the Smithsonian, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, numerous museums in North Carolina to find the expert who could give us the definitive answer and to corroborate what it was that we had found. That expert turned out to be an expert in antique metals. And he looked at the sword and the inscription under a specialized microscope and was able to make some very important determinations for us. The first, this hand-etched signature, it was not an inscription from a professional engraver. So this is not a presentation sword. This was someone with a sharp object hand scratching a name in, but the inscription is old. It is as old as the sword is old, according to this expert. So it's not that one of the Freemason brothers decided to play a joke and scratched in Jean Lafitte's name. The sword is as old as the inscription. Furthermore, one of the reasons why we needed a black light to identify what we were looking at is because someone applied an oil or a varnish over the scabbard, and that oil or varnish has sunken into the inscription. And so when the expert looked under the microscope, he said, I can see exactly what you're looking at. The inscription part is much deeper than the surface scratches from day-to-day wear and tear that are all over the sword. But he said that oil or varnish is down in the inscription. He said, that tells me that the inscription, the oil was put on after the inscription, but he said, I can tell you that the oil itself is very, very old. So we were able to confirm all of that, which made us feel a lot better about presenting this information to the public.
One of the most fascinating aspects of the discovery on that scabbard, however, was also the fact that we knew that Jean Lafitte never ever wrote out his full name. When he signed his name on documents that we had been able to find, almost always they were written J.N. Lafitte. We never saw one where he wrote out J.E.A.N. Lafitte. And of course, this scabbard bears that out. We do not believe, and there again, we are guessing, but it is our best guess that this sword was part of Lafitte's cache of weapons at Barataria. And he most likely just went in one day to one of the warehouses needing a nice big blade, which what man of that era would not have needed one for any number of reasons, combat being the least of those, and simply appropriated it for his own use and scratched his name on the scabbard. That's the most common sense thing that we can come up with. Also, what? Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to add that the brothers at the lodge recently told us something that did not make it into the book, but is very compelling. We read the minutes from that lodge from the very beginning. They are meticulous. They're things like brother so-and-so sneezed and then brother so-and-so went and got him a tissue. I mean, it's that kind of detail. And so if brother so-and-so donated a box of candles, it's documented. If brother so-and-so donated a box of paper, it's documented. This sword is not documented in the meeting minutes of the lodge. And what the brothers recently told us was, this tells us that this is an item that came into the lodge by a founding member before minutes were being taken at an official meeting. So they said, we're 100% confident a founding member donated this sword. Lorenzo Ferrer was a founding member, which is great. And we have also investigated the other men who are on that pretty small roster of founding members. None of them have any family or individual experiences with war that would have necessarily led them to have a War of 1812 cavalry saber in their possession.
Further beyond that artifact, there was a handwritten ballad discovered, and you're seeing that on your screen right now. This was discovered in Ferrer's house after he died. It is not a recognized published work, and we had consulted with experts in this field who have databases of all published works that they can go to and consult. And they did so and did not find this work. So it was their determination that this was a private ballad. We are not exactly sure of the time frame. There are many indications in the verse itself that indicate it was written in real time sometime around the War of 1812. There are some conflicting lines in there that might suggest it's sort of conflated between the Battle of Pensacola and the Battle of New Orleans. There is a lot of hero worship of Andrew Jackson displayed in this work, and it's well known that Jean Lafitte nearly idolized Andrew Jackson. So a very, very interesting document that we had always felt like. It also bears some handwriting similarities to handwriting samples of known Lafitte documents. However, complete disclaimer, we are in no way handwriting analysis experts and won't even attempt to go there. But just to say that to our unpracticed eye, there are more than one recognizable similarities between the handwriting. But interestingly, as we're trying to figure out the dating of this, we had decided already that we would try to get the paper dated and the ink. we discovered quite by accident, because the original of this is housed in the Lincoln County Historical Association. And this was after a presentation that we gave early in March. Ashley was putting this thing back in the protective coating that it had come in, and she happened to flip it over and notice what appeared to be the remnants of a penciled address or something written in pencil on the back of the document. And it was so faint, it was legible enough that we could tell that it was 1800 script. But we really could not read what it said. We have made arrangements, however, and we'll be going up June 4th to Washington and Lee University to have an expert in spectral analysis look at this and determine exactly what the former lettering on that piece of paper said, because with his process, he can do that, even if it is no longer visible to the naked eye. So that work is ongoing. And the only other document of real interest and extreme interest was the handwritten will of Lorenzo Ferrer, which we devote an entire chapter in the book to. As we said earlier, he died a very wealthy man and left money to a good number of people. Anecdotally, and we will just throw in a pirate treasure story here for what it's worth. This is purely word of mouth. We don't have documentation of this, but it is a long-standing legend. And the story was told by a man who ultimately became Lincoln County Clerk of Court. The story goes that in 1865, the Union Army was getting ready to pass through Lincoln County. And Mr. Ferrer, whose dear friend, Wallace Reinhardt, lived nearby, went to Reinhardt and said, "I'm concerned about my valuables. I don't want the Union Army to get hold of anything that I own. Would you help me get these things into the basement vault of the Lincoln County Courthouse, and we can lock these up?" The courthouse was a block away from Ferrer's house. So Mr. Reinhardt said, sure. They brought a team of mules and a wagon and several other men and moved what Reinhardt says were 2 or 3 very heavy trunks full of valuables. Reinhardt did not know what they contained, but they got them into the vault, got everything secured. And as they were turning to leave, Reinhardt tells the story that Ferrer lifted one of the lids and revealed that one of the trunks was completely filled with gold coins. And he gestured to Reinhardt and said, "For your kindness, please take a scoop as payment and thanks." And Reinhardt says that he did. Now, that same man, Wallace Reinhardt, ended up being one of the co-executors of Ferrer's will when he died 10 years later. Ferrer owned multiple pieces of property, and just by example, one of the houses that he owned was on lot 25. In his will, there is a simple line item that says, "I will my house on lot 25 to Katie Sullivan." Now, contrast that with 3 line items later. He says, "I also will my house on lot 18 and everything that is in that house and everything that it is on that lot and on the land to Wallace Reinhardt." Why he felt the need to elaborate on what was in the house and what was on the land, we don't know. But we do find it interesting that that notation pertained to the same man that told the story about the chests of gold. We don't really believe that there is any Lafitte treasure buried in Lincolnton, North Carolina. If we did, we would have been out there with shovels trying to find it already. So, you know, you treasure hunters out there can stand down. We don't believe there's anything here to find, but you never know.
So I think we will conclude by talking about the journal.
Yeah.
We're going to kick the hornet's nest here. About half of the people in Lafitte studies believe that a journal supposedly written by Jean Lafitte is authentic, and the other half believe it is not. We are of the opinion that there is no way on God's green earth that Jean Lafitte wrote this journal. The book includes a pretty short chapter as a refutation of the journal, and I'll hit the high points of that in a moment. But I am at work on an annotated line-by-line refutation of that book because it is such low-hanging fruit and somebody just needs to put it out of its misery once and for all. This journal appeared in the middle part of the last century. There was a man named John Anderson Lafitte who pops up and says, my great-great-grandfather was Jean Lafitte. I have found a trunk. The trunk contains his long-lost journal that tells us everything about his life after he faked his death. So the journal theorists they're with us on the faked death theory, but that is where we diverge. And so he had a couple of pretty significant problems. First, he changed his name to Lafitte about 5 minutes before he announced that he was the descendant of Jean Lafitte. He had used multiple other aliases beforehand, and he had also been caught forging another historical document and trying to sell it. He was also a collector of antique papers and inks. So it's kind of like the recipe for a forger is just, it's right there. And so lots of people have discussed over the years the journal, though not many people very recently have taken a stab at it. It did not take me very long to unravel it. And the reason I think I had such success at that is because of my profession. I'm an English professor with 20 years of experience. I have a PhD in rhetoric and composition. I know voice pretty well. And what I did was apply rhetorical analysis to this text. And for some reason, nobody had decided to do that. And so what rhetorical analysis is, I look at the rhetorical triangle. I'm going to put on my teacher hat for a minute. The writer-reader-text connection. I look at who is the writer, what is the situation, what is the writer's stated purpose for writing, does what is written make sense with those stated purposes, and does the writing in and of itself make sense? The answer on all of the questions that I asked was no, no, and no. And so a couple of the ways that this journal unravels, it has a very weird voice. And so for those of you who don't know, voice is the distinct characteristics of a person's writing that make their written samples unique, right? So voice is how English professors like me detect plagiarism. I can tell when we move from the student's voice to the Wikipedia that has been copied and pasted into a research paper without a citation, right? And so the voice of this journal absolutely 100% does not square. Jean Lafitte, a brilliant man. He had to be brilliant to navigate the social circles that he did, to navigate the ever-changing business environment that he did, and to survive and to thrive and to be as successful as he was, and to manage to do all of these illegal things and never be brought to justice for it. He was brilliant. The person who wrote this journal was not brilliant. You can read even just a few sentences and tell that someone with very inferior critical thinking skills put this piece together. I'll keep it brief. There's one word that we definitely need to talk about that I was able to use that one word to sort of single-handedly prove that this journal is a fraud. Early in the journal, the writer claims that his family in the journal were said to be leather makers and seamen, ocean-going men, that his family sent he and his brother to a pretty underdeveloped Caribbean island to study at a school, which, okay, maybe that's believable. But they then, after studying there, decided to be sent to another, even more underdeveloped Caribbean island because they were going to take a course in psychology. This would have been around 1796 or 1797. We've got a little problem. Psychology needed about 100 more years before it was going to be invented. So if you look at the Oxford English Dictionary, psychology wasn't even a science among scientists until the later part of the next century. And so the idea that this child from a not wealthy family would be sent to a Caribbean island to study it 100 years before it existed, even at a university, is absolutely, completely just not, there's no way that that's possibly plausible. And so the journal is filled with these sort of problems. And I'm working on a book to finally, once and for all, refute it so that,
Well, and also additionally, the word psychology itself
wasn't a thing.
was not even invented when supposedly this journal was written in 1851. The word itself did not appear until the late 1800s.
Later in the 1800s.
However, it did exist when John A. Lafitte suddenly discovered his grandfather's journal in a trunk, for what that's worth.
So we are going to conclude now and answer some questions. This is the book. We hope you'll buy it, and we hope you enjoy it. We're going to take questions now, but we are actively working on a sequel, and that's one of the reasons I retired, so I could do this full time. So we appreciate your attention, and we'll take questions.
All right, great. Thank you guys so much. That was very interesting. Just to let you know, they mentioned the book, and we had, like I said, we have autographed copies at the 1850 house. I just linked so that you get the discounted code automatically in your box, so you don't have to do anything but just purchase the book, and the discounts will automatically come off. So we do have a couple of questions here. Let me go back to them. Let's see what we got here. Okay. Janet Gross asked, and this might be kind of pertain to how you kind of found out about the diary maybe a little bit, but she wonders if his writing in English shows any signs of his first language, which was French.
Yes, it does. And one of the ways that we've been able to tell that is with that ballad that we mentioned. If you'll look back at that document, there are very many misspellings. We noted misspellings as well in the will. It looked very much like a second language, or in his case, probably a third or a fourth language speaker, spelling things phonetically. And so absolutely, there are definite examples of language, second language, third language, fourth language speaker in that document. So yes. Great.
And if you do have more questions, please put them in the chat, and I'll ask them in a few seconds. Kathy Clark asked, Ferrer's, F-E-R-R-E-R''S, grave marker looks like a table. Was that a common style and significance in any way?
The only other tabletop monument, and that is what the common term is, they are called tabletop monuments. There is one earlier tabletop monument in Lincolnton, and it actually belonged to a friend of Ferrer's. We don't know if he designed his own monument based on that earlier one, or if this was just something that he liked and decided to designate for his own grave.
Good question. Stephen Medina writes, I wonder what a jingle dollar is. It was in his will.
A jingle dollar?
A jingle dollar? Did that maybe say a single dollar?
Maybe it must be a single dollar.
That handwriting in that will is
it was hard.
It was bad.
Yeah. I don't recall.
I don't recall that
jingle dollar.
Yeah, we need to go back and look at that. It may have been a single dollar.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense.
We will look.
Okay. Let's just see. Elaine Yancey says, I'm finding this fascinating. Lafitte's story that he once faked his death. However, just briefly, what is his story before this point, and what was his intersection with New Orleans?
You can take that.
Yeah. Maybe in a short.
Yeah, I can keep it short. So the earliest research that we have indicates that he was in Haiti. And we gathered this from a couple of different sources, that he was in Haiti in the very early part of the 1800s. That nation was experiencing uprisings of enslaved people. People living on that island needed to escape at various points, and the Lafitte's ran a ship between New Orleans and Haiti, sort of like a charter service to get them off. We do know that by the early part of the 1800s that Lafitte was in New Orleans. We know that from outstanding documents at the Notarial Archives. If you've not been there, you have to go, because it's one of the most incredible places in the city. And we know he was there because of documents that are there. What he did was establish in the Barataria Bay a little enclave of pirates. So at the peak of his success, it's estimated that he had 100 ships and 1,000 men. He sent them out to attack ships. And then they came in with the goods, which he set up an auction to be able to sell. So in essence, he was about 75% businessman and about 25% pirate. And so what he was selling was anything they could get off of these ships, whether it was silks or rugs or furniture or spices or alcohol or anything. Very unfortunately, sometimes they captured ships that had enslaved people who were coming in. And so we never want to gloss that history and run the risk of glorifying a pirate who was actually a trader of enslaved people. And so they auctioned in Barataria both goods and unfortunately human beings. And he became really wealthy doing that. At one point, he was one of the 10 wealthiest men in America. His warehouses in Barataria had millions of dollars of stock. And so that's essentially what he did. Now in New Orleans, the famous blacksmith shop, right, on Bourbon Street was a front. So he and his business partner, maybe brother Pierre, pretended to be blacksmiths, but what they were really using that location for was to coordinate with buyers to sell the things that they stole.
Kathy Clark asked, did you encounter the name Lorenzo Ferrar anywhere else in Lafitte's past? Someone he may have known?
No, and we looked.
Yeah. Interestingly, though, we think we know why he might have chosen the name. We think there's a chance that he was not born Jean Lafitte because we don't have any birth records that would prove that. So it may have been that Jean Lafitte itself was an alias. He was, as we said earlier, he was known for using multiple aliases in his life. We think he chose Lorenzo Ferrer for a reason, though. Ferrer is the occupational surname for a blacksmith. So we think maybe he chose it as a joke about what the blacksmith shop really was. There's also the connection that really can't be denied with Lorenzo Ferrer Maldonado, the 14th century explorer who discovered the Northwest Passage. We think maybe he selected that part of the name too as a sort of a nod and a wink to another seafaring man. But no, before Lorenzo Ferrer pops up in Mississippi, there's not another one that would match in America. And we did not see that name anywhere else in Lafitte's past.
Interesting. Okay. Were any descendant, Kathy Clark asked, were any descendants named in his will?
Possibly one. There is the possibility that he and Louisa had a son named Vatinius. There's a very, very scant documented record of Vatinius in Lincolnton. He is mentioned in the will as being given $100. He is described as a former slave because Ferrer never acknowledged him as a son. This was only local word of mouth. Records show that Vatinius never returned. He had already left Lincolnton by the time that Ferrer died. But probate records show that he never returned to collect his inheritance, and he was never heard from again. We tried to trace him and we don't know what happened to him.
There are some stories that exist in Lincolnton about Ferrer potentially abusing him in some pretty horrific ways, but we're not going to share those because we don't know if they're true or not.
Okay, we have one final question, and this one's going to be a mouthful, so let me take note. Jay Gumba says, it's been reported that Lafitte married a Madeleine Regaud ne Lallemande during his time in Galveston, took her with him when he burned the Maison Rouge and fled Campeche. During your research of his time in Cartagena or Cuba, did you find any records mentioning a wife by this name?
There are lots of reports that he got married both in New Orleans and pretty much everywhere he ever lived. It seems like there's a wife story. The problem is we aren't able to put our hands on documents. And so everywhere we turned with our research, if we can't put our hands on the document, then we don't know. So it's possible to answer this question. It absolutely is possible. And we've read those accounts from Galveston and elsewhere. There are stories in Mexico, stories in Cuba of him popping up and having a family and a wife. But we've not been able to verify any of it with a document that makes us satisfied with the conclusion. we dug in the basement of the Raymond, Mississippi courthouse and found the document.
That marriage record.
And so it very well may be that he left a string of wives all over the place, everywhere he lived. And I actually don't think I would be very surprised if that's true.
I wouldn't.
All right. Well, a lot of people are saying this was a fascinating talk and their favorite one of the year. So thank you both for doing it tonight. As I said, we'll be emailing it out tomorrow, and I will also send as well the link to the book, the autographed books we have at the 1850 house. And you can always hop on down to Jackson Square and grab a copy as well. They're going to be, they said they would even come back later on, and when they come back through and sign again. So I want to thank you both for tonight's lecture. It was really, really fantastic, and you've done amazing work. And we look forward to the second one, and we expect to hear you guys speak again when that book comes out again.
Well, thank you. We had a good time.
Thank you so much, and everyone have a good night. And we hope to see everybody on June 1st for our next lecture. So thank you so much.